Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session on decolonizing scholarship as a commitment to racial inclusion of students and staff. It's one of the series to mark the Black History Month 2021 at the Faculty of Business and Law, the Open University. And I am Chinedu Nevo, a PhD student on the faculty, and I'll be anchoring this session with Dr. Cinzia Priola, is senior lecturer in organization studies at the LBL, and Amna, also a PhD student at the faculty. So let's move ahead to show what our discussions will look like and the structure. Okay, so yeah, first of all, we'll have an introduction and what we know about decolonization, colonialism, and all of that. Then we'll move over to understanding the concept of colonial curriculum and, of course, colonization in scholarship. Before we have that conversation, we would also make it as interactive as possible. So we would have something for you to do. We'll have designed a Padlet where each and every one of us would address some questions. So you are free to share your opinions or your own experiences on these questions. What is decolonization of scholarship and curriculum? Why should we consider it? Why are we even having this conversation in the first place? What are your experiences of colonization in the university, either as a student, as a staff, as an administrator? And then how are colonization and decolonization, what is the nexus between them and Rexism? Yeah, so I'm sure Babette would want to share the link to the Padlet in the chat. So do well to open up the link and drop your comments on any of these or all of them. And as we progress, we would also bring them up and have a conversation on them. Yeah, but before we move into decolonization, I think it's important for us to understand what a colonial curriculum is, because decolonization as a concept rests on the premise that there is colonization. So it's important to understand what it means for the curriculum to be colonized before we talk about how to decolonize it. And I have this definition that I always draw from. It says that a colonial curriculum is characterized by its unrepresentative, inaccessible, and privileged nature. So when we talk about unrepresentative, it means that it selectively constructs teaching that exclude certain, oftentimes crucial narratives. And we have these narratives on slavery, for instance, where over time there has been different narrations or different stories about slavery and what happened. And another narrative that is often misconstrued is the history of the people. For instance, a particular people from the Black and ethnic minority may be represented in a particular way. But if you meet the original people from this particular place, you find out that they have a different conception of what their history looks like. So this is like a misconstruction of what they look like. And again, inaccessible, it means when a curriculum is inaccessible, it means that it consequently prevents many of its recipients from identifying with the narrative misconstrued or hidden, which are often the truest narrative for them. And again, you also draw from the artifact from some people, that have been meant to, that have been represented to mean that like it's some sort of witchcraft or anything that is not worthy. But at the end of the day, these same things that are called bad names are eventually taken to other environments. So in that case, it prevents them from identifying with their own narrative, which is spectacular to them. And again, this issue of colonial curriculum is appealing to a holistically favored demographic. And finally, a colonial curriculum is said to be privileged because it ensures the continued participation, comfort, and flourish of this select group of people in both an academic and a wider societal context. Sadly and unacceptably, this all occurs at the detriment of a diverse range of marginalized voices. So this is for the curriculum. Now, if we bring it over to scholarship in general, I mean, as research students, as PhD students, we may have had one or two experiences on using the materials that we probably cannot relate with. So in that case, we see colonization of scholarship as the proven Black and ethnic minority attainment gap within the universities in the UK and beyond, and the difficulties of some Black and ethnic minority students to relate to and engage some academic material stipulated for their studies and research. Oftentimes we download papers, we use materials for our research that coming from a particular people, especially if we are from the Black and ethnic minority, you probably may not relate with these materials because perhaps they are mostly drawn from the scholars from the global north, so to speak. You see, so it extends to university list that comprises mostly white scholars. I came across a pictorial representation where you have some drawings of some scholars. So in this picture, you have some white scholars and then you have some Black scholars, both those who are dead and those who are still in existence. And you find out that in that picture, the Black scholars, they have something sealed. They have their mouth sealed. And the white scholars, they are very vocal, they're allowed to speak. So this is a subtle representation of what colonization of scholarship looks like in reality, where most the academia or the scholarship is modeled around the white scholars and what they have done and their contributions to knowledge and their contribution to scholarship, and then erroneously omitting the same or similar contributions by the Black and ethnic minority counterparts. So we also have other examples from our own experiences and especially from my own experience as a PhD student. So you have other examples of colonization in scholarship. And this includes perhaps you see some publishers or editors requiring certain things from some people from a certain region that seem biased against a particular population, say people that have English as a second or third language. And then again, modeling research on theoretical foundations that are not suitable for a particular context. Some theoretical foundations, some research philosophies, some research paradigms that only people from a particular area can identify most with, while some other people from other regions may not necessarily identify because it doesn't tell their story. It doesn't represent what they see as knowledge from their own geographical divide. And having to stick to research philosophies and paradigm in English that have no clear import in the context of some countries or regions. And of course, the inability of some people to access education through some online course platforms like the Open Learn, where English is the only language of instruction. But some people from certain areas may have English as a second or third language. And in that scenario, it's also important to have this online platform able to teach them or able to have courses or deliver courses that they can relate with in their own languages. To also represent this colonization in scholarship, I came across some statistics that says that for the UK, only a fifth of UK universities have committed to reforming their curriculum to confront the harmful legacy of colonialism. An investigation by The Guardian found this. So these 5 years of data collection by the Office for Students shows huge variation in how universities in England admit, retain, and award degrees to their students based on their sex, economic background, and ethnicity, with this figure showing especially wide gaps in attainment for Black students compared with other ethnicities. Among the worst offenders were the Canterbury Christ Church University, where the attainment gap was 41 percentage points, followed by the University of Gloucestershire, Sheffield Hallam, and the University of West England. Then responses to this freedom of information request that 128 universities in the UK revealed that only 24 said they were committed to decolonizing the curriculum. So in this case, it is actually these 24 that believe that the curriculum has a colonial undertone in the first place. Of those, 11 were committed to reform across the whole institutions, and with most efforts confined to a few departments or just one or a handful of academics and students. Now, out of all these 128 that responded, let us look at it. So 84 of them said that they are committed to making their curriculum more diverse, international, or inclusive. 36 are offering staff training. 34 are consulting Black and ethnic minority ethnic students on curriculum design. 24 are committed to decolonizing their curriculum. 20 are taking no action at all. And 11 are committed to decolonizing curriculum university-wide. So this is more like giving a small intro on what colonial curriculum is and what colonization in scholarship actually means. So maybe you would also want to see the Padlet and share your views on what this colonization in the curriculum looks like. Yeah, before Dr. Cinzia will now take over from what decolonization is all about and how we can look at it in practical terms. So Babette, you may want to share the Padlet so we can also draw one or two instances from the responses there. So we actually have a lot of them. Okay, so let me read the first one. So it says, from my very limited knowledge, decolonization of curriculum means understanding where the knowledge that we include in teaching comes from and how the long shadow of colonialism, I skipped that. It seems it moved. Okay, I also saw another one. It says, we need to decolonize all aspects of our thought, both in the colonies and in the colonial powers, because the colonial thought is built on racist and patriarchal ideologies. And these are some of the issues that Dr. Cinzia and Amna will also dwell on. Then we have a view from the early translation of the Bible through our being forced via a structured colonial education system and language racism. We have been made to feel that our knowledge is what they, the colonial powers and the inheritors, teach us, but we are not ignorant. Okay, yeah, that's quite a lot of perspectives. So looking at this colonial curriculum from the standpoint of our own research, looking at it from the standpoint of being a staff, being an academia, or being an administrative. So you find out that there are different things we understand as colonization in scholarship and colonization in the curriculum. Yeah, so, okay, at this point, I would introduce Dr. Cinzia to now take over on what decolonization is in the practical terms. Okay, Dr. Cinzia, you can take over.
Thank you, everyone. I was trying to look at the chat at the same time. What's happened is Chinedu wanted to talk while giving you the time to put comments on the Padlet. At the end of the presentation, we will share the slides. People have asked for some stats because Chinedu was talking about some stats. It will put those as well in the other in the Padlet on in one of the slides, so that will be fine. We will share it with you. So what Chinedu has just shared in relation to decolonizing. So what we mean by decolonizing, or in our attempt to decolonizing, is that we try to make what we teach and how we teach it more responsive to the problems of and the issues of colonial and racialized privilege and discrimination. That is easy said than done. So how do we do that? One of the things is we could ask ourselves some questions, and I put up some of the questions in these slides. The source is SOAS. They have a decolonizing toolkit that we can all access. Is available online, and I found it useful in the past when I was trying to develop my teaching material at the Open University. I'll include the resources and the link at the end of this presentation. So one of the questions is, to what extent does the content of my course or my program presume a particular mindset of students? And this is what exactly Chinedu said. We take a perspective in Western universities, in global North universities, we've taken a perspective that is a Western perspective. Regardless of our race, we've often, the majority of us have been educated within, as Chinedu said, within materials, within the English language. So often our mindset and our perspective fits with the perspective that we've been taught. So how do we break that? To what extent? Questioning us to what extent we're perpetuating that mindset is quite important. But also to what extent does my course, my program, allow students to understand the origin and purpose of the field. I think this is quite crucial, and this is something that me as an educator and as a teacher at the Open University attempt to do. And sometimes we say, oh, going too much into history, we just make the material that our students are learning a bit too heavy. I'm sure all of you come from different faculties, different discipline. But if I think about what I've been doing at OU, I've been developing material for an MSc in HRM. How do I teach HRM, which is Human Resource Management, if I don't tell students where that came from? In order to understand HRM, we need to understand that this is a part of a practice that came and emerged from neoliberalism, that came and emerged during Reagan's government policies, during Thatcher's government policies, and is actually an invention, in inverted comma, of the US that came to the UK pretty much the same since the 80s. So we are teaching HRM to the rest of the world. We're teaching HRM, something that emerged within a neoliberal ideology. And we're teaching it as without giving any background to the historical context. And even in international business, what we do is we're actually imposing what we do of HRM, and we try to understand how people manage their staff, manage personnel, manage human resources, if you want to use this word again. Even the use of the term human resources is embedded within the neoliberal ideology. So how do they manage staff? We try to understand in international business, how do they manage staff by using a concept that is actually a concept developed within an Anglo-American ideology, or an Anglo-American, certainly policy. So we don't do that most of the time. And we could do this with every, every course or every discipline, trying to understand where the concept we're teaching come from. Another question, the third, to what extent does my course, my program, acknowledge and cultivate an appreciation for diverse entry point? And again, this is something I think we avoid. We often provide our own entry point, whether that is critical or more mainstream. So how can we do that? These are, I think these first three questions are possibly more difficult than the last two, but it's something to start the conversation. Start to think, how can we do that? And the conversation will have to happen in team, in course teams, certainly. And I would encourage chairs particularly, but all members of team, to put this question out there when we are producing modules, but also when we are looking at, yes, it's, I'm just looking at the comment, just using alone, it won't, and it will be part of other conversation. But one of the things also in putting together module teams is, what is the demographic profile of the authors on the course or on the program, and do programs enable the use of non-English source in their curriculum? What does enable means? It doesn't necessarily mean that we will have to refer to sources if we don't know that language. But why don't we allow students, for example, to write material referring to sources in different language? Often we ask students to put in their references, in their works, only English sources. Why don't we make it explicit that they're allowed to use sources that are non-English, non-written in English, and why don't we encourage them to use literature from their own country? As I think someone put in the chat, these are that, you know, we need a bit more to decolonize the curriculum. We need, if this makes sense, we need to I don't know, we probably need a toolkit. We've got something called the inclusivity tool at OU. I don't think it does enough. It makes us thinking about possibly some of the aspects in terms of language, but doesn't do enough. So why do we want to decolonize? What are the benefits? So the benefits are to uncover unconscious bias, uncover our own unconscious bias as scholars and unconscious bias of students. When we bring the colonial perspective into our material, and I'm talking about whatever discipline we are, there is always a colonial perspective. So when do we bring it into our writing for students? We're opening up, we're broadening their vision to include other perspectives, to include ethnic, racial, social, and cultural perspective in their own viewpoint. We broaden their knowledge as well as uncover the unconscious bias. If we encourage them to seek, for example, to seek wider reading list, to seek authors that are not within the Anglo-American landscape, we can allow them in a way to access different knowledge. I've not access to the chat yet, so I can't comment, but I'll go back to it. So we prepare them to face an increased diverse world. Whatever their country, I suppose we are working in the UK, where the population is getting more and more diverse, but this is happening across many countries where our students come from. So how do we put into practice? I think we mentioned a few things. One of it is teach ourselves about critical race theory. We can read, we don't need to go into become theorists on critical race, but we can, we can go on Google and just satisfy our curiosity about racial inequality, how it is perpetuated in everyday structure in society, and how it is perpetrated in our subjects. There are very easily accessible sources online, and I think personally, as an educator, I take that as my responsibility, just to go and do and try to understand it from the easier sources. There is a lot online. The other thing, we can audit reading list, as we said. We can involve students in decision making. It's very hard for us at the Open University when we are preparing material before we present them. We're not in a classroom where we can draw on from the students, but why not inviting students to our team, production team? Why can we involve them into our writing process? How difficult it is, I don't know, but that is an opportunity. We need to be more creative. Again, I think exploring other languages to decolonize ethnocentric approach, and then involve speakers, or in our modules we do present. If we do, for example, interviews, we present videos with interviews with scholars or with practitioners or with other people. So do we keep in mind who we are invited, and can we actually extend can we invite a diverse range of guests into our event, but also into our module? I'm now going to pass on to Amna, who is actually looking at moving from decolonizing the curriculum to decolonizing university. Mustafa is exactly right. How can we decolonize our curriculum without a broader commitment to decolonize the university? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cinzia and Chinedu, for your talking points. And yeah, I mean, first of all, before I start talking about new liberalism and its connection with university, I think it's better to establish that university, modern university, in its own connotations, is quite European construct. There have been universities before this, like University of Alexandria and Timbuktu, but most of these universities, their form and content were significantly different of what we are witnessing today in terms of universities. And having said that, I think universities in Europe, as they have been part of a colonial empire as well, where the violence, they actually, like knowingly or unknowingly supported the violence in colonies. If I talk about anthropology, how they draw the maps out, how they divided people, and how they categorize people, all of these things were, significant in terms of creating boundaries and perpetuating violence. Having said that, I think these movements, have been different movements to decolonize universities since 2015, and actually before then, But University of Cape Town in South Africa, they started this movement called Roads Must Fall, and then this kind of was like a wildfire which spread all across the world, specifically in the UK, where people started asking about why my curriculum is white and why my professors are black. But having said that, I think one thing which was very unique in the context of South Africa and this movement was students, they did not only ask roads must fall, they talked about fees must fall and outsourcing of services must fall too. Because we cannot deny the fact that there are there are different linkages between universities and capitalism and new liberal pressures on universities and corporate funding structures, which area of research you want to go for and which area of research is not feasible, practical to do it. And I think when I was studying at the University of Sussex during COVID-19, this movement outsourcing of services, specifically cleaning and all, we have been protesting against it quite a lot and supporting these workers who happen to be racialized workers, who happen to belong to ethnic minorities. And I think all these things are really important to discuss about. And as Fanon said as well, decolonization is a complete overthrow of imperialism and capitalism, both in colonies and colonizers, states as well. And in my opinion, these things are important because when we talk about colonization, I don't think so any decolonization is possible without talking about the material aspects of colonial experiences, specifically how land was expropriated, people suffered, resource extraction and all. So it all goes back to how capitalism again is connected with universities still, in my understanding. And I think no decolonial possibilities will emerge if we don't talk about the redistributive justice in different contexts. And I think this is a point how to change these material structures and how to move now from rhetoric of decolonization to doing of decolonization, because we have been hearing rhetoric of decolonization for some time, where universities, just to appeal some certain sections of the society and market specifically, they are saying this. But what to do next? And in my point of view, there is no such thing as we don't have a list for this. I think every context is different. Every country is different. So let's say in South Africa, post-apartheid politics is very different, and definitely the role of universities have been, so in every context, like for instance, in terms of Pakistan, I can say because I come from Pakistan, military is very powerful there, and they exercise a lot of role. It's a very post-colonial institution, by the way, military. They have they exert a lot of like a huge pressure on universities to teach certain narratives. So I think this is different in the UK. This is different in Pakistan and different in South Africa. So I think every place is different in terms of how to decolonize what has been given to us in terms of colonial perspective and narrative. And having said that, decolonization, as my colleagues, Dr. Cinzia and Chinedu, they were saying, is not only limited to teaching, material and a few writers of color that you include them and that's it. I think it's much more than that. And I just would like to quote one example of, one university in Mauritius. It's the African Leadership University, and they are doing a couple of things. Just as Dr. Cinzia was saying, language, they are actually experimenting with that it's important for students to engage with one text which is not written in English. So people, they get to know, even when they don't understand, they will get the translation, but still they will know that this perspective is coming from a text which is not written in English. And the third point, which is very interesting, which actually resonates with my own experiences as well, is that student exchange ratio. So what happens? There have been a different, actually, a lot of people from the West, specifically students, they have easy access to our countries, like in Global South, because of the visa regime. They have, they have strong passports, so it's very easy for them to come and to, explore our culture and all. But it's very difficult for us to come to these countries. Personally, I have been facing a lot of issues. Like when I was in China, I did my master's there. I was denied a visa for Hong Kong. But I was supposed to go there for my assignment, but many of my friends, they were able to go and explore, that thing. So I think this is very important that people of color, specifically academics of color, they do face a lot of issues in academic exchanges and, like because of borders. So I think, again, decolonization of campuses, they go back to how to decolonize like our narratives about migration, border controls and all. And as Dr. Cinzia and Chinedu were always, they were saying that students should be involved in this process, and African Leadership University is doing it, and their perspective is the text is not enough. So people need to explore more cultures through food, movies, films, and most of all, I think one of their principles which I really like is ethics matter, because ethics, as we know, like ethnography has been a very important tool of colonizers in terms of understanding people. But now I think ethics matter because of we need to understand the power differentials in research and many other things. So that's true. And I think some of my final reflections are that decolonization is a process that it needs to go on. It's not a smooth one, because as Fanon says, it's not easy to to take down the structures of power. But I think that the effective engagement is important. And I think in the context of Britain, as far as I have seen, I think a couple of things which I understand is like decolonization at least should entail some material outcomes, such as there should be more people, specifically from Black communities, in our faculty. There should be more funding, for research, which specifically focuses on colonial, and experiential knowledge of people who have suffered these direct consequences of colonial experiences. And the improvement of working conditions for people of color, staff who are working on campuses. They have actually there are a lot of surveys, they talk about the fatigue, and all that. So I think we need to discuss that too, of working conditions of people. And in my opinion, these decolonization narratives should not be limited to just yearly conferences and events. And I think a lot of people of color, they perform this unpaid diversity labor, like they are not even paid for these things, just because universities expect them to do it, so they can cater to some, specific educational market. I think there should be more understanding, but more conversation and engagements. And I think, as Audrey Lott says, that it is not our job to educate you. I will not do unpaid labor. That means oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility, while people of color are exploited. So I think it's important that we recognize this, but we also read and listen and probably just understand these things. And having said that, I will just ask Dr. Cinzia to take the control back. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was also looking at the chat, and there is a lot there, and obviously a lot that we could cover, we could have covered in our talk. I think what Amna finished there is actually, and I want to go back to the quote of Audre Lorde. It is not our job to educate you. I shouldn't read this. I will not do unpaid labor. That means oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility while people of color are exploited. So for me personally, as a white person, and I agree with the comments that colleagues have put in the chat, and I think Amna also referred to, doing decolonization is also doing there is violence in decolonization, because you cannot break down systems, you cannot break down way of thinking, you cannot break down power structures without violence, whatever that violence means. It doesn't, as I said, there are different ways. I think one colleague just said there are different ways of doing violence, and you can do violence with words and different type of actions. So from my perspective, from the perspective of a white person, although not a British person, but a person that comes at the edge of the global north, on the border with the global south, although it is a global north, I have to specify, there are certainly two aspects that make important for us as a university to decolonize. For me, to decolonize is also to do anti-racist action. Is one of the many things we can do, and I'm not saying that we will ever reach decolonize, we will never decolonize our curriculum, or it will take ages, I'll be dead by then. We will not decolonize our campus, but for me it is a process, as Amna said. It's something to aspire to, something to do, knowing that it will be a very difficult fight, and just like fight racism. So for me, fighting racism or doing anti-racism is about education. So we need to educate our students. We need to educate ourselves. We should not leave the education of student matter or racism to specialist department. And also we need to realize that universities are elitist institutions. They are characterized by systemic inequalities, not only in relation to race, but also in relation to gender, in relation to class, in relation to ability. So universities are set up in a way that reproduce a system in which Black people and people of color are treated different than white people, students and staff. So faculty members, professional service colleagues of color do not achieve the same level of seniority than white colleagues. So why is that? Let's interrogate ourselves as to why. And that is also means to do anti-racist work, and it also means to start decolonizing the campus or the university, as Amna and some of the colleagues on the chat are saying. So there is, I'm sure we can all think about experiences of casual racism as other people that felt on their own skin, or people that witnessed as witnesses. So obviously me as a white person, I cannot speak from my Black colleague, from my colleague of color, but what I can do is that I can educate myself on issue of race and racism. I can educate myself on white privilege, understand what anti-racist action are, and call racism out. So as fighting addiction, as Ibrahim Kendi says, being an anti-racist requires persistency, requires also self-awareness, and it requires self-criticism and self-examination. It's sort of a choice, is a radical choice in the first phase of history, and requires a radical reorientation of our consciousness. It's not easy. It's a long life commitment. But we can start with something. We can start by accepting that we are complicit in white supremacists. We can start by accepting that we have internalized racism as white people, and that we actually reproduce it every day. So the moment we accept it, we sort of become our own guardians. So as soon as we say something that reproduce races, we learn from it, and we'll do better next time, hopefully. So educate ourselves and learn, watch, read, attend workshop, involve colleagues, people of color as I said, in our work, discuss with others, become accountable, for example, join anti-racist organizations and group, commit to anti-racist action. So call out when you see racist actions. Open up conversation with friends and family. Work with team members. Sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat. The last few. So how can we address and counter racism? And I want to basically what I'm connecting to, you know, it's just a part. Fighting racism is a part of Decolonize the university in a way. But for me is a starting point. So obviously these open up the action that we can take. How do we work in anti-racist in anti-racism manner? And we can have obviously 3 levels: a personal level, an interpersonal level, and a structural level. One of the things obviously is that at a personal level, as I just mentioned, becoming familiar with the triggers, becoming familiar with those implicit bias, and learn, study history. An interpersonal level is obviously engage as a bystander. So clean up, in a way, the language and the microaggression that we view and we witness often, just call it out. Create brave space for conversation and learning. And then I think our university, we have got, I think the last certainly couple of years, we've got an explicit commitment. Senior management has made an explicit commitment to diversity, and I think that's, you know, we are starting, but we are really possibly starting. I'm not sure the conversation even started in every small group, but we've got a commitment from the institution. We are hopefully developing an anti-racist policy, and we need to start looking at changing the material condition, not just the language. I know in the chat there was something about language, and it's fundamental, the language, but also we need to change the material condition within our can we say campus? I mean, now we are all spread, but by campus, I mean beyond the Wharton Hall physical boundaries. I'm realizing that the time is past. We wanted to leave 10 minutes to at least to look at the chat and also allow people to talk. So I've got some resources here. We have we will share the slides so you can click on those. But in terms of toolkit, I think is something that possibly as a university we need to develop. There are two examples as well in there, one at SOAS and one Liverpool. So Liverpool is much is a start, let's say a starting point, much less developed, less advanced than SOAS one. So now I want to thank everyone, thank as well my co-speakers, and thank you very much for listening.